As you start to move towards that, what you're manifesting and what your life is should start to converge. And once that happens, you're like, wow, I've been saying this thing this whole time, and all of a sudden, it came true. Manifestation must work. I want to tell you why that might have happened, but probably not for the reasons you think.
Okay, wait, you in particular, somebody doesn't know the difference between white and yellow. I can't build with concrete if I'm putting up a stone house. This is a lumber company. This is a construction supply company. This is supposed to be all you people do. And you still don't know the difference between white and yellow. I feel crazy. This is the second time this has happened. And I'm like, I'm losing time!
This is the first solo episode, so if this is your first episode of this podcast, I usually have two other co-hosts, Francie and Dan, and the point of the podcast is, instead of Googling something, for an hour and a half, Francie and Dan just ask me questions. And the shtick of the podcast is that I typically have answers to those questions. Now, we sort of broke the format this week because they sent me questions, or they sent me topics. It's very funny because the topics that they sent me are like very characteristic of both of them. You'll see what I mean in a sec. But for this week, it's just going to be me. And I don't know how long I'm going to just sit here and talk for, but we'll see what happens. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is actually something that's been happening. Of course, everybody knows about it. It's been the only thing in the news. But there's a piece of commentary, and I don't really track the news too closely. I just sort of like slightly keep up with who's bombing whom. But the thing that's been dominating the news cycle is, of course, Trump and Epstein. And I have not seen people saying enough, and it's been just sort of like whatever the opinion version of burning a hole in your pocket. And I don't have Twitter, so I don't like tweet these thoughts, so they just sort of run around in my head until somebody engages me in conversation about something like this, and I'm like, oh my god, I know, what the hell, and I immediately am on my soapbox. But the deal is, how do people not understand that the Republican Party is happy, or at the very least is easily capable of playing this news about Trump and Epstein, the likelihood of the relationship between those two men, sort of the fact of the relationship between those two men, is more than happy for that to happen. Why? Okay. So the Republican Party has a problem, which is that their platform of this wild conservatism, this misogyny, racism, and transphobia is currently rather attached to one individual, and that's the president. And as long as you have that, there's this like great personality thing. Like, people want to put up signs for Donald Trump because they feel personally validated. There's all kinds of reasons for that. Like, there's all kinds of reasons for that, from the fact that he validates their own sort of fears about the world, to the fact that he validates their like ideas that they're, it's really easy for Trump to win over the incels because of how he talks about women. It's that kind of thing. There's also economic reasons why poor people often prefer Republicans, and those specific people are better reached by Trump because of his like style of speech, all that kind of thing. In other words, what I'm trying to say is the Republican Party has this personality problem, because the reason they've won these two elections is not because they have better policies or anything like that. It's because they were finally able to find a better person. For years in for the length of time of Barack Obama's presidency, the Republicans sort of struggled to find personalities that people could rally behind the way that people rally behind Barack Obama. And then they found that. But do they really want to put themselves behind a third Trump term? And clearly, many of them do not. Why clearly? We'll get to that in a second. But it sort of makes, some of them do, like some powerful people in the conservative politics, like Peter Thiel, really want authoritarianism. We'll come back to Thiel. But there are sects of the Republican Party that really want authoritarianism, because of course there are. But there's also like a real, there's a real problem there, because if you don't want that, what next? who do you pick? Who is the Kamala Harris to Joe Biden to Donald Trump? And will that person get Kamala Harris? There's a big problem there. How do you build public support behind a new guy? What if you had someone who believes in all the same things as Donald Trump, but is sort of more politically sanitized, politically sterile, and then is free from this kind of controversy? This whole Epstein thing is just giving huge fuel that would be unattainable in any other way to J.D. Vance's presidential run in 3.5 years. Or for 3.5 years from now. I just don't hear people saying that going off on Trump is not the point. The pedophile thing is not the point. Like, we're getting distracted from the point. There's so many things, and it's like, I understand the desire to dunk on Trump and the ability that we now have to do that because of the Epstein and Maxwell stuff is like, great. Like, you know, I understand the desire to do that, but you are not, this is not the real problem here. Like, it's a real problem, right? If he's like a criminal. Okay, if he's a different kind of criminal than he's already been convicted as being, then, like, I get that. But there's so much more important things, and you are, in fact, playing into a narrative that I'm not sure the Republican Party likes, but they are going to be definitely able to manipulate to their side. And I just don't hear people talking about that enough. And that's kind of gotten to me recently. Like, guys, you have to see that there is a political media machine working here. Right? You don't really think you're being outplayed. You don't really think that you're outplaying the conservative media machine here, because you've never done that before. You've been outplayed at every turn, and so why do you think now's the time? No. What you have to do, liberals, is focus. Focus on what you really care about. And I don't think what you really care about is proving that one of the worst people on earth is also a pedophile. I don't think that that's what you really care about. I think that you want to win. I hope that you want to win. I want you to want to win. And I think I also want you to win. So that was that little soapbox. The first thing that I'm going to talk about, the first topic that I got from Dan and Francie is, Dan said, so what's up with cannibalism? Don't click off. Don't click off. What's up with cannibalism? How much have we done it? How long ago did we do it? And what's going on there? And I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. So the first thing to... Can you handle this pivot? Is this like too much of a pivot? All right, so cannibalism. There's a lot of evolutionary pressure to not eat members of your own species. If you eat members of your own species, you're taking, you are sort of lowering the chances that those members of the species like grow to childbearing age and have kids and share their genes. And it's like, there's a lot of evolutionary pressure to keep as many members of your species alive as possible. And yet, there are lots and lots and lots of species that engage in cannibalism. So before we talk about human cannibalism, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So cannibalism is really, really common among invertebrates. There are lots of species of spiders and praying mantises and lots of carnivorous bugs that engage in intersex cannibalism. So you'll have females eating males, usually around breeding time, and that has to do with caloric maximization. And there's other evolutionary biology stuff that I don't really understand, like I don't really have off the top of my head, that are going on there that are the reason like the females eat the males when they're breeding. So cannibalism is also very common among large mammals, of which humans are one. And the type of cannibalism is particularly important. Like, so among big cats, most of the time, cannibalism has to do with eating... I'm sorry, listen, blame Dan. Cannibalism has to do with eating the young, which there is an evolutionary reason for that. So big cats typically have to minimize their caloric expenditure, and that plays a factor in that if you want to make sure that it's your genes that are passed down and you want to laze around as much as possible, it makes sense to kill and eat the young of a different male lion, for example. And so there is this biological drive towards cannibalism for big cats because of how they survive, because of the fact that, you know, a lion can catch prey whenever it wants, but it takes a huge amount of calories to catch prey, and so they want to spend as much time as they can sort of lazing around. Cannibalism is also very common among primates, non-human primates. So it's particularly common among chimpanzees, but it's also been recorded through the, what do they call them? Hominids, all through the fossil record. So there are lots of bones that have been found with tool marks as if the flesh has been cut away from them, and these are human bones. And there are lots of different classifications for what kind of cannibalism, what counts as cannibalism, not what counts, but like what counts as what kind of cannibalism, and like what were they really cutting the skin off of their sort of fellow member of their species. I'm talking about like Homo heidelbergensis and stuff like that. Were they really cutting the skin off a fellow member of their species to eat it, or were they doing it, like, for example, so that they could bury the skeleton and they could put the other remains, the flesh remains, way far away so that it wouldn't attract predators to where they were living. This is an important thing. So, you know, they still wanted to bury them because there was still a cultural aspect to, like, mourning and burying your dead, but they did not want to attract, like, for example, lions, right? They didn't want to attract big cats, big predators to wherever it was that they were living. So, the other important thing to know about cannibalism among hominids, and as we start to talk about cannibalism among human beings, is that cannibalism, trying to describe it, it's an extremely finicky process to like classify. There's like lots of little classifications for types of cannibalism. That's because cannibalism is inextricably cultural. Like there's possibly no more culturally significant thing, like culturally significant bad thing, than cannibalism. What else carries the particular amount of horrific revulsion that comes with cannibalism? Like, maybe per the first topic, maybe pedophilia, right? But I think that if Trump was on a list of cannibals, then the panic over this would be even worse. So because it's so inextricably cultural, there are lots of little classifications for types of cannibalism. Like, for example, if you have two factions of human beings and one kills and eats another, right? That would be exogroup, or outside of the group cannibalism. And it would also be warfare cannibalism, right? Because you would be attacking them and you would be eating them. And then the question is, are you eating them, like, why, right? Like, are you eating them because you were hungry, in which case it's also nutritional cannibalism, or are you eating them sort of like to celebrate war and to continue to dehumanize these beings that it is evolutionarily, it is sort of, you've killed them, and so you want to continue to defend your tribe. In order to do that, if you're a anatomically modern human, you have to sort of like culturally dehumanize the people that you are fighting. This is very common. You see this in a lot of propaganda. You need to paint the people that you are killing as less than human. And cannibalism is one way to paint them. I guess it might be a result of painting another group of people as less than human, right? Because we don't eat people, we eat things that are less than people. And so this is why warfare cannibalism is this form of backing up or reinforcing in your brain the idea that the people that you're killing are less than human, so that you don't feel guilty and you won't like hesitate when you're fighting them. So that's warfare cannibalism. There's also this thing called mortuary cannibalism. So remember how I was saying that they would sort of remove the flesh from their dead relatives? If you're dead ass watching this podcast, comment below and just say like, yeah, I made it to that part. So I was talking about removing, like with stone tools, the flesh from a dead relative so that you could bury the skeleton, because that's culturally important to you, but you don't want to have the flesh near you because of predators. Well, you could do that and consume the flesh. And the weird thing is, this may not have been culturally horrifying to people at that time. One important thing to note is that if you eat human meat, uncooked, it has very, very high pathogen load. It has maybe higher pathogen load than eating like the meat of a different type of animal, and that's because like there are bugs adapted to kill humans that are in the thing that you are eating, okay? So you might think, therefore, that one reason we're so horrified by it is because we've learned culturally, sort of in the sort of collective unconscious, that it's more dangerous. That might be true, but the fact is that we have been making fire and cooking food since before we were anatomically modern humans. So practically speaking, that is probably not the case because most of those bugs would be killed by cooking it. Whether there would be cooking involved in this ritual of mortuary cannibalism, I don't know. That's probably documented in some kind of archaeological record, but I'm not sure. So that's mortuary cannibalism, where you are culturally, in a non-taboo way, consuming the flesh of a member of your group, which would be endogroup cannibalism, who has died. And then there are types of cannibalism that are sort of like the most culturally thought of, which is like ritualistic and human sacrifice and that kind of thing. There's way, way, way less evidence of that being common. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward, because in order to practice cannibalism, you have to sort of waste a human life, and not even necessarily in a cultural sense. Just think a bit of like a resource collection, sort of a resource maintenance sense, where if you are killing, right, if you are going to eat someone, that person can no longer contribute to your community. So this is why exogroup cannibalism involved in warfare kind of might have, like, this is one reason why it might have happened, because they're dead already, right? Similarly, in mortuary cannibalism, the person that you're eating is dead already. And people, anatomically modern humans, were capable of understanding that if I kill someone, they can't help me gather food anymore, right? So that is why things like sacrificial cannibalism is so much less common than these things like mortuary cannibalism. What else do I have to say about this? The human body contains like on the order of 100,000 calories. I'm not exactly sure how correct that is, but it's an extremely large amount of calories. However, like I was saying just now, what someone in your community can contribute, if they gather 1,000 calories or 2,000 calories a day in food on average, it only takes them like a month and a half to pay back what you would get from eating them. And of course, you cannot really, it's hard to maintain those calories, right? Because you preserve those calories if you like eat a human being. So it's like calorically inefficient to eat human beings unless they are dead already, which is why, or I'm sort of hypothesizing, but this is why like sacrificial religious rite kind of cannibalism, human sacrifice kind of thing, is way less common. And in fact, even if we set aside cannibalism, we really only see human sacrifice in more well-established civilizations. There's an asterisk, I'm not quite sure if that's true, but from the examples that I can recall of like genuine, well-documented cases of human sacrifice, there are a lot of really poorly documented times when we think that cultures performed human sacrifices, but for the, like, we're sure this is happening, like the, I think Incas or Aztecs, I don't remember which, one of the big South American civilizations. These were like very, very rich civilizations, and they could afford to do this, right? They could afford to, for example, spend one human life to guarantee a better harvest that year, because they were sort of getting something out of it, and they were rich enough that they could, like, you know, you got to spend money to make money kind of thing. But that ritualistic cannibalism is way less common. And I'm done talking about cannibalism now. So if you made it through, like, hats off to you. I need a drink of water. The other thing is, I'm going to eat fine tonight. I'm not going to be vegetarian as a result of this conversation. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about is manifestation. So this is a Francie topic. The first one was a Dan topic. Regular listeners of the podcast will not be surprised about that juxtaposition and the fact that each is coming from each. Let me just check my microphones. Okay, we're still good. You still recording? So, what the fuck is manifestation? Does it work? And why do people claim that it works? So, the manifestation is one of those things that you can have someone describe it to you, but it is very different, probably, in different people's minds. And people have different relationships with the concept of manifestation. It's a very individualized concept, right? That, in and of itself, should raise your eyebrows. Because whenever something is real, whenever something can be like verified and tested and like be very evidence-backed, it really converges to a shared experience. People who have had really good experiences with a therapeutic technique called eye movement desensitization and reconditioning, or maybe response, I don't remember, EMDR, they say like I've talked to people who've had that, they all say the same things, right? Like, oh, EMDR feels kind of weird, feels like this, then it felt like this, and then I did this, and then I felt like this. And they all sort of say the same thing because it converges on like one thing. This is not necessarily true for manifestation. But having said that, right, there are some common elements that you can pull out. I think the most common element is to linguistically say something that you want to happen. Or to visualize something that you want to be true. So the first thing to understand about manifestation is it's not about, what do I want to say here? The first thing to understand about, what I was about to say is, the first thing to understand about manifestation is that it's not an action, it's a want. But that's not true, because saying this thing out loud is an action. And I was about to paint it in like a much more negative light than is accurate. So let me revise that. Manifestation features an action. In fact, it features basically a prayer where, and I'm using prayer, this is what I mean by that. You are going to say inside your head, or you're going to visualize, you're going to sort of take this action, and thoughts can be actions, right? So you're going to like take this action that focuses your mind, hopefully, on one thing in the future. You're going to take time to do this. You're going to pause your day in order to visualize this. Pausing, repeating a phrase over and over again, and visualizing something are all legitimate meditation practices. These are all grounding techniques. These are all dharana. These are all focusing techniques. Dharana is the yoga word for, the Sanskrit word in yoga for a focusing technique. So these are dharana, right? But manifestation is a little more than that and a little less precise. No. See, I keep painting it with this negative. I have a bias against manifestation, but I keep painting it with this negative brush that I don't necessarily think it deserves. So I'll just say manifestation is a little bit more than saying a prayer. Because if I say, Om Purnamida Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Purnachette Purnasta Purnamayadaya Purnameva Evashishete, that is not something that I want for the future. In fact, that has nothing really to do with me. Like it does, actually, but like it's not like I don't appear and my life doesn't feature in that saying, okay? But that is like a mantra or a prayer or a sort of a thing people say to themselves in a sort of a similar meditative setting that people often say these manifestations, or that people often manifest things. But it's very different because, in a way, manifestation is much more focused. Manifestation is where you go, this is the thing that I want to be true for myself, and this thing is good for me. And this is what I want to start to talk about now, is like, what do people actually manifest? Obviously, this depends on who you are, but it's going to be something that you believe will be good for you or that is something that you want. Like, for example, let's say that you manifest getting a new job. You've applied for a bunch of jobs and you're manifesting what your life will be like in 6 months after you have that job. So as you start to move towards that, what you're manifesting and what your life is should start to converge, right? And once that happens, you're like, wow, I've been saying this thing this whole time, and all of a sudden, it came true. Manifestation must work. So I want to tell you why that might have happened, but probably not for the reasons you think. So in order to understand that, you have to understand how meditation period affects your life. So first of all, what is meditation? And there's basically 2 camps that meditation practices fall into. One of them is grounding or focusing, and the other one is open noticing and awareness. Okay? So grounding meditations are going to be things like chanting a mantra or staring at a pattern of triangles called, the practice is called Trataka. I don't remember what the pattern of triangles is called. Practicing that, or jumping into a cold shower, right? Or jumping into a cold ocean in the middle of winter. These are grounding practices, and the goal of a grounding practice is to destroy your own thoughts. They're gone, right? That will create a state of no thoughts, and that state is called dhyan, or I think I'm pronouncing that right. I always do a little bit too much H when I'm doing the Sanskrit word. Dhyan. I don't know. I'm doing my best. So those practices, I'm paranoid that it stopped recording. I always do this. No, we're good. Those practices are aimed to destroy your thoughts so that, if you're lucky, you will achieve a newer state of consciousness when you will have realizations about the world, about yourself, that kind of thing. So that's focusing meditations. The other type is noticing meditations or awareness meditations. These are what we classically think of as mindfulness, because if you really think about what is a grounding technique, what does jumping into a cold swimming pool do? It really creates mindlessness, right? There's no more thoughts. You're just whoa! And that feels good to people who have anxiety, which is characterized by lots of thoughts happening really fast, sometimes happening in loops. We want to be mindless in those moments. But noticing is really mindfulness, where you are watching the thoughts go through your head, and you are using practices to be non-judgmental about those thoughts. This is sort of classical mindfulness, which comes from the Zen tradition, which is an offshoot of an offshoot of an offshoot of Buddhism. Not to reduce the Zen tradition, but historically speaking, it's an offshoot of Buddhism, okay? It's this one corner of the Buddhist tradition, which has a negative connotation, which I don't necessarily mean. There's, for people who know a bit more about meditation, it's easy to be a little bit frustrated with mindfulness. But the truth is, the reason people get frustrated with mindfulness is that it just doesn't work for many people who think that that is all of meditation, and then they miss out on being helped by the fact that mindfulness doesn't work for certain brains, or is much harder for certain brains. But anyway, that's that kind of meditation. So if we look at it, where is manifestation on this sort of scale? It's kind of interesting, right? Because you can't really create something that you manifest unless you are aware of your own thoughts, right? You have to sort of know what you want in order to manifest it, and so you have to sort of listen to your thoughts in order to know what you want. So it's kind of over here, maybe. At the same time, you have to, the practice of repeating, of verb sense, manifesting this thing every day, the daily practice of manifestation is very grounding. And I feel that's a lot of why it is practically and emotionally helpful for people, is that it does serve that purpose of grounding. So which is it? What's going on here? And I think this is why manifestation really helps some people and really doesn't help other people. Because If you use manifestation in the way that I just described, what you will practically speaking do is you will spend time examining your own life and taking a hard look in the mirror. What am I satisfied with? What am I dissatisfied with? What will help me? What will help me get there? What will help me be fulfilled in my life? Which is obviously a good thing for most people, right? Maybe, maybe not. But it will like sort of, you have to do that reflection in order to manifest in a way that means anything, right? So then, once you have that, you have to do this daily or multiple times daily practice of, again, sitting down and stopping what you are doing and doing this thing. Stopping your daily grind, pausing your daily flow of thoughts and actions is really, really good for people's psyches. This is like a well-known thing. You can sort of understand this intuitively. It's like anything that just allows you to pause is like really good for people. So the reason why, by the way, is like there's neurological effects of doing that. If you pause, it'll slow down your breathing. If you slow down your breathing, it'll not necessarily, especially if you don't do it for more than like 20 minutes, but it has a chance of like lowering your production of cortisol for 24 hours, and that has like a marked effect on your life. So these are good things. But what is that marked effect on your life? You're going to, if you have less cortisol in your brain, you're going to be more calm. If you're more calm, then your medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, is going to be better able to inhibit the reactions of your mind and basically help you make better decisions. So if you make better decisions, you're more likely to you're more likely to find yourself able to do the things that are important to you in life. So you're more likely to be successful, right? So am I saying that the reason that manifesting helps you is because it actually just helps you, right? It's not that it makes those goals happen. It's that it actually makes you better able to achieve your goals. I'm saying that's possible, because this is where we get into like, no, Eli, manifestation is not a meditative practice. It's not a like an offshoot of yoga or Buddhism. It's not about it improves my life. It's about it literally creates the thing I want. And if I say that this is why manifesting works, I'm sort of appropriating a different culture, right? Because I need to drink water. Because there is a culture of people who do manifestation and understand it to help them. And I don't. I don't do manifestation, and I have not understood it to help me. So if I try to explain it with my understanding of yoga and say this is why it's helping other people, it's cultural appropriation, isn't it? So how do I reconcile that? So this is my guess as to why manifestation practically helps people. Or more like this is my attempt to shine a scientific light on why manifestation works for the people it works for. And if you want to do it, do it. The real question is, why does it not work for the people that it doesn't work for? And to understand that, I think we need to understand the slide, the sort of, geologic strike slip fault between the yogic perspective and the kind of like modern Western perspective on manifestation, which is that you are speaking this thing, strictly speaking this thing into existence. No meditation, none of that. You're just literally like causing this thing to be by speaking it. The problem with that, I don't know if you guys can sort of see this, is I don't know if you guys find this too, but like not everybody knows what they want, right? Especially I love to ask people, what do you want, right? When I'm sort of helping someone like plan a lesson, for example, one of the most useful things that I can ask someone who is trying to engage people, children or adults, in some kind of lesson is, what do you want? But people hate that question because it's very challenging to come up with what you want. Because if you ask somebody what they want, it starts to raise all kinds of connotations of like, what should I want? What is it right for me to want? How much impact should I be having on the world? You know, do I want the right things? Are the things that I've wanted in the past still what I want now? And am I okay with that? Like, what do I want is a really problematic question to get into. So, like, but you kind of have to do that for manifestation. So, if you don't, right? If you just say, I want money, yay, money. Let's imagine what happens now. You do that every day, and you just think, you manifest wealth into your life. What is next? Okay? Because if you're like, okay, what I'm manifesting is I want to get sort of some kind of specific job in this industry that I'm sort of more qualified for and I want to work in. And if that happens, and if I am successful at that job, I might end up getting money, but I've sort of narrowed it down to this one goal. Then you manifest. And practically speaking, like, I'm not talking like this is the only reason manifestation works, but practically speaking, your MPFC, medial prefrontal cortex, will have an easier time running. It will be like biased in terms of how much it's affecting your decisions. And what does the medial prefrontal cortex do? It operationalizes. It looks at a big complicated task and says, do this first. And because you have a decent goal, right, like you have a goal that can be broken down or can more easily be broken down into those steps, then you're just going to start doing those steps, or you're going to be more likely to because you did this meditative practice, practically speaking. But if your manifestation is to get money, right, and you don't really know how or like what do you want to do? Do you want to start like a side hustle? Do you want to apply, gun for a promotion? Do you want to go back to school? Do you want to start driving Uber Eats after work? Do you want to buy a car? Do you want to move to the city? Like, what is it that you need to do to get money? It's like, what is your first step? And then it doesn't matter like what your MPFC can do there, and because there's like no way to operationalize it. And then the other thing is, when you actually do that meditative practice and you have a more specific goal, what will you be thinking? Like, what's going to be going through your head while you're like in the mirror? I always visualize somebody manifesting into a mirror, okay? I don't know if that's really true. Manifestors, sound off in the comments. Legitimately, like, tell us what you do. But if you are like in the mirror thinking through your like, I want to gun for this promotion at work, you're going to be thinking of those steps, because over the course of your meditative practice, your brain is going to calm down and your MPFC is going to start to make those better decisions and to start to operationalize. So you will actually find yourself, I suppose, or I strongly suspect, you'll find yourself operationalizing while still meditating. And so then you will leave the meditative practice with first steps every day. And it's so important. Lao Tzu, 1,000-mile journey starts with one step. You only have first steps. So if you have a good specific goal, manifestation is going to make you think about those first steps. And if you have a non-specific goal, manifestation isn't going to help you in that way, right? The only way that it would possibly help you is if manifestation works, is if speaking this thing out into the universe actually makes it more likely to happen. That is the only way you have of it working. It's all like faith at that point. There's no chance for you to, it's like not making it, practically speaking, easier for you to pursue that. So the only way you're going to get that money is if somebody drops it on you. And if nobody drops it on you, you're not going to get it. So that's why I suspect manifestation might not work for people. So then you're like, okay, so there are other mechanisms that are ascribed to manifestation, like the law of attraction, where was like good thing come to you if you attract good thing type shit. I'm not exactly sure what it is, which is why, like, again, like, this is cultural appropriation for me. But I'm not trying to discredit manifestation. I'm trying to be helpful. right? I'm just trying to be helpful to people. So, like, but anyway, there's this mechanism that's ascribed to manifestation where if you say this thing out into the world, does it make it more likely to happen? And this is where we have to go take a big step back and ask, why do things happen in the universe? Why do things happen? And fundamentally, from the perspective of human beings, I need more water. I don't know why I'm asking permission for each sip of water, but I am. For human beings, it only takes two things to create something in the world, to manifest something in the world. You need an intention, and you need some type of energy. And this makes sense, right? If I want to fidget with this thing here on my desk, I need an intention, I'm going to get it, and then I need some kind of energy. If I don't have the intention, I can't have it. If I don't have the energy, I can't have it. Okay? But here we go. Right? So, when you're manifesting, the two different sort of ways, those two different sort of paths that I described for manifesting, they're different in actually in both of those things that you need to make something manifest in this world. One of them, when you are thinking, I want money, you have an intention, but you obviously have less of an intent. Or it's like there's like less pixels. There's like less resolution in what your intention is. Because you know, like, how do you get that money? I don't know. I just want money. So there's less resolution. But there's also, practically speaking, less energy. And I'm not trying to say that there's less energy because that's the wrong way to manifest. But just like, you're not, like, this is the point. This is what people say, is that I'm not doing anything to like make this happen, because that would be the other kind of manifestation. They're saying like, it's just gonna happen. So there's like literally less energy if you're manifesting that way. So you know, if we need an intention and some kind of energy, you kind of have not much of one and none of the other, because you're not doing anything to make this happen other than manifesting, right? So there's less energy, less intention. And what about the other kind, where there's this thing that you want, and every day you're kind of thinking about this thing that you want and like speaking this thing that you want into the world, but it's much more specific. I want this promotion at my job. I don't know why I'm using that in particular, right? I want a new therapist. It could be anything, right? I want health insurance. If you're doing this thing, you're gunning for a promotion, there's actually a lot more energy because of the way that motivation works. Motivation is very strong when you believe that you can get the thing that you're thinking about getting, right? Like I said, if I believe that I can get this fidget on my desk, it's so much more easy to pick it up. The thing that's across the room from me is much more challenging to pick up because it would take more steps. I'd have to get up. I would have to cut the podcast when I was editing it later so that I could not be off the screen for too long. So the point is, I lost my train of thought. I've been doing so well this episode of not losing my train of thought, but it just happened. Intention and energy. Right, you need less energy. If you can split a big task up into smaller tasks, you will need less energy to accomplish each of those tasks. So, in conclusion, I think that manifesting is as good as you are capable of making it. If you don't really know what you want, don't maybe expect manifestation to work as well. Not even for any kind of practical reason, not even because I'm trying to say that manifestation doesn't work. Just because for something to exist in this universe, you need an intention and some sort of energy. So if what you want to do through manifestation is to just cause something to exist, make sure that you have a good enough, like a specific enough intention, and make sure that you have enough energy to achieve the first step. Otherwise, I wouldn't expect it to work, because nothing can exist without that intention and that energy. Nothing in the universe.